Welcome to Why the Long Face? Two old friends lifting the lid on mental health over a beer with author and psychiatrist Paul Keedwell and business consultant and so-called comedian Ollie Turnbull.
And welcome to episode 3 of season 1 of Why the Long Face with, hey, let's do this, with me, Oliver Turnbull, and
me, Paul Keedwell.
Dr. Paul Keedwell. Do not hide your light under a bushel, my friend. You're a doctor.
Yeah, I am.
And a proper, I am, yeah, and a proper doctor.
Yeah.
You studied hard for that, man.
I did. I worked hard for that.
It wasn't just drinking.
Most
You're
of the
out
time.
for a pint, Paul.
Most of the time.
No, I'm studying.
No, I'd go out for the pint.
And then you go out for the pint as well. He was a
I
good
work
man.
hard and play hard.
He did indeed. He was good company.
Talking of which, welcome, by the way, but I've got a very nice... most of you, I think, would be aware of Brewdog.
Yes.
The Dead Pony Club is a very nice session IPA. Ooh.
There we go. I'll just have a little slug.
Normally we have
Crikey.
two different beers and compare, but
That is really... Oh, it's even spurting out the top.
it might be too tasty for you because you like your lager.
Yeah, there's a strong taste to it, but I can dig it.
Yeah, not too heavy.
Certainly not too heavy. It's very
It's
light.
it's a West Coast style, man, so it's quite light.
Right. West Coast of what?
But nevertheless
America?
hoppy, quite citrusy.
The citrus is hoppy. There's tones of. Don't you have to say tones of these days?
I don't know, maybe.
There's tones of, and then
There's a bit-
citrus.
Oh, notes.
Notes. That's it.
Yeah.
Notes and
The
tones.
citrus notes.
There's a musical metaphor, isn't it? Because you can't really describe taste.
Um,
There's no vocabulary for it.
Well, we do our best. We do our best. So this episode,
Yes.
we're going to attempt to cover the very large topic, I guess, potentially meandering topic of what causes depression.
Yeah, and I don't want to get you too excited, but Dr. Keedwell has come up with a categorization which I think, and I don't think this is hyperbole, I think is the greatest scientific breakthrough of mankind. No, I just think it's really a good way of breaking down the causes of depression. But what the doctor has told me is that it's not black and white, so it's not a really strict taxonomy because lots of things are at play and lots of things overlap as well. But I think what you've come up with is a very useful way of breaking it down.
Well, thanks, man.
No
Yeah,
worries.
I try to please. So what we're going to try and cover in this episode then are the three main categories, as I see them: biological causes, life events, and thinking style, cognitive style, right?
Yeah.
Which can also be termed biological, social, and psychological, but that sounds quite dry. So yeah, biological, life events, and cognitive style.
So can I, as a layman,
Yeah.
try and describe what I think those three categories are, because I found it very
Yeah.
useful when I read your article, which we're obviously going to put up on the website. So biological is sort of the way you're put together biologically, coming from hereditary and coming from just the way that you're organized biologically. Socially is kind of stuff that happens
No,
to
you moved on too soon. Man.
Ah, did I?
Yeah, because under biologicals, not just your inherent makeup, which we might call genetics, but the biological influences on you, things you might put in your body,
Right.
and also physical illnesses. So they come under that.
Okay, so biological is the way you're made up and things that happen to your body over time.
It's a biological influence over your brain that is affecting you, right? Whereas stresses and strains of life,
Right.
which could be short-term or long-term, right? And then cognitive style.
Because it's almost like your software, the way you think about things and the way you interpret the inputs that are coming into your senses the whole time.
Right.
Basically the way you think. And
Yeah.
that can be sometimes distorted and not helpful.
Yeah, so take two people who are exposed to the same life events that will have different software and therefore interpret those events. There'll be a different output.
Because I don't want to confuse it, but what you have talked about before, which I think is really interesting and useful, is the way that certain people have a vulnerability to depression. And you could almost give them a score, but we wouldn't want to do that. And it's almost as if you in the right circumstances, almost anyone could become depressed. It would just take a lot more for some people than others.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah. Well, let's go into it, because when you talk about vulnerability, there's vulnerability that is inherent, and there's vulnerability that is acquired. How about that?
Nice.
Biologically or through life events and stuff that happens.
Is this bordering on nature and nurture, or is this
Yeah.
something different? I see. Right.
Yeah. So you by nature quite grumpy.
And
And
I find that hard to accept.
and quite red-faced.
I'm red-faced, yes. Biologically
I think
red-faced.
that's biological. You're a
Yeah.
you love a beer.
Well, my dad helped me out on that one.
Yeah.
He
Is he
introduced me
feeding
to
you
beer at
booze?
about the age of 3. And most kids go, "Oh, Dad, that's horrible." But I went, "That's all right, is that?"
All right. Well, listen. So genetics, keeping life stresses constant, right? Because we all have life stresses, but some more than others. But it's assuming we all had the same amount of stress in our lives, some people would be more vulnerable than others. And there's a bell curve of vulnerability, in
Okay.
my view. And so most of us would take a moderate amount of stress, or quite a lot of stress, I suppose, to get depressed. And the rest of us fall at the tail ends. So those who are very sensitive don't need very much stress. They're at one end, tail end.
Mm.
There's not many in the population, I guess. And equally, there are some stoics who, no matter what you throw at them, they never get depressed. The other tail end, right? That we think is equally a bit odd in a way.
Got it. So, can I ask a question about what used to be called endogenous depression, which is, in other words, depression that comes from nowhere? I think that was the meaning of it.
Or comes from within.
Ah, right. More accurately.
Endo,
Right.
yeah.
Of
Within,
course.
as opposed to exo, without.
Got it. So, nice bit of Greek or Latin. Let's not go into which. So, are you saying that actually
No, because
that's...
neither of us.
I know what the hell we're talking about,
Yeah.
despite my grammar school education.
Yeah.
Wherever
He
you
says
schooled.
opening his second small beer.
Yeah, only small bits, because we don't in any way advocate heavy drinking.
No, man. It's one of the
I-
biological influences over depression.
We'll come to that. Are you saying that endogenous depression is something of a myth, and that there must be a reason it can't bubble up out of nowhere? That's what.
I think it's had its day as a term because it's quite difficult to argue that depression's come out of the blue, but at the same time, people definitely describe, some patients in my clinic have definitely described this feeling of depression coming from nowhere, like a curtain just descending over them, like a safety curtain at the end of a performance, right?
Ugh.
In the theatre. And they could be so happy one minute, maybe on holiday, and then this curtain descends. But it's you then say, well, okay, but was there a build-up of stress over time?
I see.
There was So, but I still find the term kind of useful in the back of my mind sometimes with certain individuals, I guess, and they would be at that bottom tail end of the curve, I guess, the
Right.
extreme end.
Right.
The way we would think about that is this person has a very high genetic loading, but of course this assumes that they don't have lots of psychological vulnerabilities from their upbringing, which is the thinking style thing.
So I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but it is so fascinating when you're in a clinical setting and someone's presenting with depression. How important is it for you to categorise the reasons behind it before you can attempt treatment?
Well, these are false categories in a sense, because people have a little bit of from column A, B, and C often.
Right.
So what you're doing is not. Yes, you are. I suppose you are. You have got a certain framework for assessing, for thinking about the cause, a kind of grid of biological, psychological, social, and predisposing, triggering, precipitating, and then perpetuating things that maintain the depression. You do have this sort of 3x3 grid. Yeah, you've got that system, but at the same time, you're not categorizing the patient or the person in front of you.
Right. Yeah. I understand that you're trying to work out the reasons, but not to categorise, but just to understand the reasons.
What's the relative importance of
Yeah.
each? Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move on with biological. So we've discussed genetics. Is there more to say on that?
Just to say that there isn't one big gene, a depression gene, that causes depression. So how the vulnerability to depression is transmitted genetically is complex and probably involves lots of genes of small effect. So, for example, you might need to pick up 6 genes to get high vulnerability. Your father's got 3, your mum's got 3, so were never particularly vulnerable. But just by chance, you ended up with all 6. Then that's sort of how it works. So that is a way of understanding how it can jump generations and how it's by no means a dead cert that if one parent's got it, you're going to get it.
But there is more likelihood, isn't there, that if one parent or two parents have depression, that you're likely to suffer. Is that proven?
So in general, if you have a first degree relative, so that's someone who's a sibling or a parent,
that's 50% consanguinity.
So that would be. Are you going to explain what that is?
Yeah,
what that
consanguinity is a measure of how closely related you are to somebody. So 50%, as you so rightly say, to a parent or sibling, and that goes down the further you are away, to an eighth if you're a cousin, and to a quarter if you're a niece versus uncle.
So 50% consanguinity.
You don't know the
would
word.
confer a. It's so important to you.
It's
so important
to know a word that you don't. It is
so important.
Pathetically important.
Hey, I do know that word, but have I ever used it in clinical practice? Never.
Well, maybe you should.
Maybe I should start. So just to finish the point, so your risk might go up by 3 times if you had a close family relative.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you presumably, when you're presented with the patient, you ask about
family history.
Family history.
You do, yeah, always. Yeah.
So we covered genetics.
Just to say that we're talking about predisposition, but then you need often an environmental impact, some stress or some other influence from those we haven't mentioned yet, that makes it more likely for you to manifest it. It's what we call a stress liability model.
Got it. Which is a model that we have talked about and I love.
Yeah.
Let's
so
move
we're
on.
talking about liability. Yeah.
So biologically, drugs and alcohol, you were explaining at the top of the show that you put that in the biological category because it's something that is physically affecting you. Cheers, by the way.
Yeah, cheers. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about 1 or 2 drinks every now and again. We're talking about dependence on alcohol. So an unhealthy, harmful level of alcohol over time, particularly continuous pattern of harmful use, has been shown to make you depressed. It affects your brain chemistry, as you imagine. And
a stupid question, are some drugs worse than others? I know you list in the article meth, cocaine, MDMA, but...
It's easy to understand how, when you come down off these drugs, then you might have a period of low mood, and that is usually temporary. But imagine if you are particularly vulnerable genetically to depression, it's not a good idea to take any of those.
And I guess, why do you take a drug? You take a drug to have a good time. Implied by that is fun and happiness and being high. I don't think people generally take a drug to feel depressed. I suppose you take a drug to feel mellow. I suppose marijuana's a classic example. But typically, you do it to enhance your mood or change your mood.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising there's a biological payback.
No. I mean, obviously, we need to say here that there is a sort of two-way relationship between drugs, alcohol, and depression, in that about a third of people who suffer from depression end up using alcohol, for example, to a harmful level as a kind of self-medication, as a way of trying to cope with their depression. So it can be the other way around.
A horrible cycle you can imagine, can't you? Because you can get temporary relief from this unbearable depression by having a few drinks or a smoke or whatever it is you do, and that takes you one level further down the misery overall because you wake up with a hangover or whatever, feeling worse. You can imagine getting into that trap. That's horrible.
Yeah. And then, of course, we move on to the prescribed drugs.
Medication.
They can be another cause.
And, of course, it falls into the biological category because it is something that is affecting your biology.
Yeah. So it's having a direct effect on brain receptors, I guess. So these drugs are passing through what we call the blood-brain barrier, and they're having a direct effect on your brain, and an unpredictable effect. So if I was to inject you with interferon, you'd have...
Is that a real drug?
It sounds like something out of Captain Scarlet.
Yeah, or Buck Rogers.
The interferons sapped us of our superpowers.
Absolutely no way. If a doctor says, I'm going to give you interferon, I'd be like,
So the interferon alpha, which is used to treat viral hepatitis, it's a type of immune chemical that we generate ourselves often in response to some kind of threat to our bodies, right? It's often given to enhance our ability to attack viruses, and it can commonly cause depression.
Do we know why?
No.
Okay. Moving on to...
No, we do have various theories on it. Steroids is another one. Oral contraceptives it can affect some women adversely with their moods. Some anti-hypertensive drugs, some blood pressure drugs, in other words, and Roaccutane for acne.
Do you know what I've heard about that one? Yeah. That's something to.
So that's the name. That's the names. The some common ones, but well, I would say it's the commonly known ones. But the effect of these on your mental state, I mean, is by no means definite. It's a minority of people that are affected.
Can you take one of these medications and under certain circumstances, never been depressed before, and suddenly experience this period of depression? That must be terrifying. I guess.
Although you're more likely to get depressed when given these if you have a past history of depression. So
was going to be my next question.
Probably true of all of the alcohol and drugs as well. But physical illness is the next one.
Ah, yes.
So
this was quite a surprise to me, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it was. I thought,
so a lot of people who get flu suffer from depression.
Isn't
probably
that hard
briefly
to differentiate from just feeling a bit pissed off because you're got flu?
But it seems to disproportionately cause depression compared to other debilitating infections.
Good
right?
Answer. Yeah.
And same with HIV and same with glandular fever.
Or mono, to give it its...
Mono.
Why is it called that?
Mononucleosis.
Oh, right. Oh, you know everything.
Yeah, but that tends. If you say glandular fever to one of our American friends, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. They call it mono.
They call it mono. Yeah, I think I've heard that.
And then hormonal problems. So basically, any problems with your glands can wreak havoc with your mental state.
Wow.
Yeah. So thyroid issues, parathyroid, which is the little glands either side of your thyroid that affect your kind of calcium metabolism, your bone metabolism. Adrenal glands. So I don't know if you heard of Cushing's disease, or Addison's disease.
Yeah.
They can be associated with depression.
Gosh.
Then inflammatory disorders. So things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, due to a direct effect of the inflammatory chemicals that are generated in your body.
And this is quite aside from the fact
similar mechanism to what I mentioned before.
So not related to the fact that you've got rheumatoid arthritis or lupus and that makes you unhappy. It's actually physiological.
Seems to be a direct biological effect rather than. I mean, it is the case that arthritis, perhaps lower back pain, stroke, cancers, understandably are associated with depression if they are invading your sleep due to the pain. Or they're restricting what you can do in your life. That's understandable.
So the more you talk about this stuff, the more I realise that it's a sort of mixture of things. Because if you've got cancer, that's a depressing thing to have straight off.
Yeah.
But there can also be, like you said, a biological effect of the disease, which gives you a vulnerability to depression, as well as the fact of having the disease itself. So I can understand when you're talking to a patient how complex it is and how these things.
Yeah, and I think I probably I've managed to just confuse everybody by mentioning arthritis under two different categories. But the point being that rheumatoid arthritis generates an autoimmune response which seems to affect the brain directly and independently of the pain and the disability that it causes. Because otherwise you'd have the same prevalence of depression if it was just about pain and disability in osteoarthritis as rheumatoid arthritis. But there's a higher risk of depression with rheumatoid. Does that make sense?
It does absolutely make sense. You've explained it well, but there's something about inflammation as well in depression.
Inflammation is the new kind of theory of depression.
I think it's probably worth having a sentence or two on that.
Yeah, there are some people who, when they're suffering with depression, have a very high level of inflammation, even when they're just stressed. And this is this is thought to be perhaps an intermediary step. And if you were to give people aspirin or things that calm down their inflammatory response, they may not be depressed. So that's the latest kind of thinking on it, or might reduce the risk of your depression. But the only problem with theory is that it's like all the other theories, it doesn't explain all depression. There are plenty of people who suffer depression that don't have raised what we call inflammatory markers in the blood. If you give someone something which generates an inflammation, they are going to get depression. A lot
That's
of the
extraordinary.
time. You take that away, the depression goes away.
It's almost as radical as the discovery of serotonin as being an important.
Well, let's not get carried away, but it's certainly very interesting. It's not, it's not going to lead to a necessarily for a cure for depression in everybody, but it's definitely worth taking on board. Indeed.
All right, so cool. We've come to the end of biological in some detail. Genetics, drugs and alcohol, medication, and physical illness. Let's move on to the next large category, broad category, life events. Stuff that happens to you externally, which is non-biological, but can have a negative effect with regards to your vulnerability to depression. So what kind of stuff are we talking about? I bet I can guess.
Well, you looked into it, didn't you? Because you did a bit of research yourself into the Holmes and Ra scale, right?
I love that scale.
Yeah.
Absolutely
and
brilliant.
What was number one again?
I think, golly, I haven't got it to hand, but I think it was divorce or spousal loss at 100. Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was lots of little things that can add up as well. It's additive as well. That's the thing I liked about it. So you could put together a pretty high score if you
had three small, relatively minor events,
or
all at the same time.
If your football team lost like every game in the season or whatever, it could add up to the equivalent of a period of imprisonment. Just remind me what that scale is, because people might want to have a look at that. We'll probably put the link up on the website.
I think it's just it's a scale that was based on a lot of on some research into people's medical records and the sort of the frequency of which people would experience medical or psychological illness, I suppose, or disorders following various life events. So
the science behind it.
Yeah, so different events had different loadings based on the likelihood that they would trigger this, stress-related diseases.
And the point scale, 100 was the worst, and then stubbing your toe was 1 point.
But I, without going into too much detail, because people look it up, but divorce, imprisonment, bereavement, moving home, massive one.
That's a really interesting one. Every time I've moved home, I've felt stressed, and I felt a sense.
You made everyone else stressed.
But everyone's just good by going on about it. But I felt not only the stress of working hard to move home, but you also feel a little bit discombobulated. You feel a little bit detached. You feel a little bit, I've uprooted and moved somewhere else. I think that's probably part of it as well. Or maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, some people like to have no attachments, but I think in general, people like to, because you're renting yourself out of a community, aren't you?
Yeah, and it's your stuff, and it's your house, and you're used to the shape of the rooms, the configuration of the rooms, your own bed, the noises, the smells, the sights, the sounds of the house that you're used to.
Thank you, Oliver Turnbull, Poet Laureate.
Here's my poem, The House, by Oliver Turnbull, age 53. Anyway, so
but I suppose you can go through a kind of bereavement for all that. It's not just moving house; it's the consequences of moving house.
I feel very sad when I say goodbye to an old house or an old job or anything. You walk through the empty rooms, going bye bye room.
It's not depression, is it? It's a sort of gentle melancholy, but it could become depression.
Maybe I can certainly relate to it being, although it's often a positive thing, but I can relate to it being melancholy. Good word.
Right. So I know lots of people who've moved house and not suffered depression. Same with bereavement, actually. Same with divorce. Some have come close to it, I think. And so it's basically not that simple.
We hear that more and more. And do you know what? The human brain is the most complex thing in the universe, in the known universe. Who is going to expect it to be simple? It's incredibly complex. It's therefore not going to be, this happens to a brain, that's the outcome. It's going to be incredibly multifaceted and unpredictable.
Not only is it probably our most complicated organ, right?
And your second favourite.
In my case, second favourite. In your case, possibly third favourite.
Copyright Woody Allen, 1972.
Yeah. It is also packed full of a load of experiences that are unique to you.
Of experientially goodness.
Well, some goodness, maybe, in your case.
Yeah.
Occasional.
We have this thing that we talk about in the job I do about complicated versus complex. And complicated is something like an internal combustion engine.
God, here we go.
In other words, you put petrol in and oil in, and you turn the key and it works, but you don't know all the bits in the internal combustion engine. But the level of predictability is high. In a complex system, such as the stock exchange or a weather system or the human brain, you can put a set of inputs in, and the outputs are very unpredictable because it's a complex system.
God, how much do you get paid for that stuff?
I get paid very little. I had a
That's
brief
not true.
period.
You get paid disproportionately highly for that kind of nonsense.
I had a brief period in the 90s
Surely.
when management consultancy was fashionable.
I
where
could
got
do your
paid
job,
quite
man.
well. Oh no, you could. Yeah,
You could.
yeah, you could definitely.
No, I couldn't. I wouldn't have the language
Well, no, you'd learn that.
because you flower it up a lot. It's great.
I just
Brilliant.
explained what a complex system is. I think I did quite well. That'll be £1,000 an hour.
But you're right. You're right. The brain is a complex system with unpredictable outputs, which is why psychiatry is not a good. I think I've said it before. Profession to go into if you want clean-cut results.
Yeah.
Your efforts. It's a bit like why surfing is so addictive. I think that's why you carry on doing psychiatry. It's the same reason that you stay in the water waiting for the seventh wave. You know what I mean?
I just have to say,
I mean, there's always something you do for everybody.
you look hilarious on a surfboard. And can I just say, there's a downside to it as well. I've spoken to you a lot of times after, people haven't got better, and you take that home with you as well.
My wetsuit has just progressively shrunk
I'm
as I've
talking
got
about
older.
psychiatry again, not surfing. My sweatsuit has shrunk.
Particularly around the midriff
Yeah.
as I've gone into middle age. It's very, very annoying
looks
that
like
it should disproportionately shrink in that area.
It looks like a baby seal trying to take its first step. It's absolutely hilarious.
However, I can actually ride a wave, but it needs to be a moderately small one, and with plenty of time to set myself. A nightmare at Fistral Beach, which is near Newquay, folks. It's because they often there's two swells coming in, and you've got about 3 seconds between waves.
Shall we move on?
Hopeless. Oh yeah. So the meaning of events, as important as the events themselves. That's the main point. We'll come back to this later.
All right.
So how you interpret the event, what impact it has for you personally because of your own unique experience is more important than just adding up the number of events you've had. And
Got
go,
it.
Right, you're going to get depressed. But
So, for example, if you drop dead right now, that would barely
register on your radar.
Whereas if, say, that guy we met earlier, who was just a great guy, if he so much as twisted his ankle,
Oh, the guy you really like,
yeah, he's
your
brilliant.
new best friend.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah,
Look,
thanks,
don't be
man.
like that.
Thanks, man.
No, I see
Well, my mother might be. No, she probably not even my mother would care that much.
no, she would. She quite likes
Sorry.
you. No, your mother, she said, she's quite
No,
fond.
I think-
She's grown quite fond of you over the years. One thing I read was that if something undermines your worldview, that can cause such devastation that it can spiral you into depression. The shock of maybe a partner leaving you if they were your world and it was something that was completely unexpected, or you're the head of a firm and that defines you as a person and the firm collapses. Or you find out that you're adopted, or something that really, really shakes you at the foundation of what your worldview is,
Yeah.
can score highly for you personally, whereas for someone else without that strongly held worldview, it might be less devastating.
Well, it's a bit of that, and it's a bit about the circumstances, isn't it? It's about the consequences being way more impactful in those cases than someone who, where the company goes bust, but you don't really care about the job.
Yeah, exactly. If you
And
lose-
you've got,
that's
and
right.
you've already got another job lined up.
Yeah, yeah. And your job to you is just a way of making money so that you can go mountain climbing.
Right, or the relationship breakup where the partner isn't your world, far from it, and you feel a certain sense of relief, as well as inevitable sadness, though, because the relationship's failed. that
So
you wanted
context
to
is key.
success. Yeah.
Are we going on to
So
the third category?
why not?
Let's recap. Biological, we talked about 4 different types of that. Life events, which we talked about. Highly contextual, very unpredictable, because we're talking about complex systems. By
Yeah.
the way, if you want to get hold of me for some management consultancy, I am incredibly available. And finally, this is probably my
And
favourite,
Quite cheap, right?
relatively. So the 90s was the time for my game. Cognitive style. This,
Especially 1999, I seem to remember.
Oh, that was the biggest.
The
rip-off
Millennium Bug.
ever. The Millennium Bug.
You're such a bunch of shysters.
Oh, and it was terrible. We knew it at the time as well. It was like, well, what's going to happen? Well, anything. We'd say, what's going to happen in 1999? Well, literally anything could happen. We'd say, literally anything
Which is
could happen.
because you know that's the most terrifying thing you could say.
Anything. It's like
So
Brexit.
please hand over your wallets.
Yeah, because anything could happen. But hang on, haven't people been able to have mortgages that go beyond the year 2000 for the last 20 years? Well, yes, but literally anything could happen. Planes will fall out of the sky. The year 2000 was. I won't even go into it, but it was something. It was the Millennium Bug started in 1985.
Yeah. So life events then.
You don't
We didn't
care
mention
about my
divorce.
job.
We were saying short-term grief reaction after divorce is normal. But what might make depression more likely is if you had a particularly acrimonious split that protracted,
Children.
you drag through the courts, custody battles that go on, and that sort of thing. I think is more because I think the key to understanding what causes depression is chronic stress, persistent stress, not just one event. And the other thing to consider as well is what social scientists call ongoing life difficulties, which is another way of saying you're under chronic stress.
Yeah.
And then something comes along and that's the last straw, and then that tips you into depression. So the event itself, you might think, which is where the Holmes and Ra approach falls down. You're like, okay, well, you just had on our scale, this shows only a 20%. Why did you go depressed? Well, because I had these huge debts that have been building up for the last 3 years, and I don't know how I'm going to pay them off.
Now the scale is far
or
far
I'm
too simplistic.
I'm in a very unhappy marriage,
Yeah.
and then I lose my job.
Yeah.
On top of that,
Yeah.
or the thing that tips you over is perhaps related to the chronic life difficulty, and just
That reminds me of something quickly to touch on is the chronic stress versus acute stress. Because acute stress is fun. Acute stress is like running 100 meters, or acute stress is like doing a big presentation at work, or a high profile case that you might have or whatever. But chronic stress winds you down, and it seems to me, and I'm sure I've read this as well, is that we're not really designed for chronic stress.
Well, I think we're adapted to acute stresses. Yeah, we're adapted to deal with those, not the chronic stresses of modern day living and stuff, which we talked about in previous eps. But specifically, we're talking about in an individual's lifetime here. But yeah, I think going back to this thing of the event can seem innocuous, but if it's related to the ongoing difficulty, for example, you have had an unhappy marriage, you are going through a difficult marriage, and your sister gets divorced. Boom. It's not even affecting you directly, but the meaning for you of that divorce.
I never thought of it like that. Interesting.
I need to get divorced.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'm now terrified that that's what's going to happen to me.
Because she's in pieces. Let's move on. Let's move on to perhaps
cognitive style.
Yes, number 3. We've had biological, we've had social. This is cognitive. The way you look at the world, the way you think about the world, the way your mind makes sense of the world. Because in a sense, we're creatures that are taking in information all the time and trying to understand what it all means, right?
Yeah, I'm constantly trying to understand what you mean and who you are.
And whether you're a valid organism or you're a viable organism. I understand that completely. So yes, cognitive style you've called it, which is nice. Your way of thinking. Things happen to you and your way of processing that, I think the hypothesis is, can make you vulnerable or otherwise to depression.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh man, this has got to be worth an ep in itself, man.
I think we'll be coming back to these themes. That's why this ep should be considered introductory.
Right? We should consider
I reckon.
this introductory.
Well, because we're going to come back to how to alter cognitive styles, and we're obviously going to address these issues again, right?
So why don't we just do a quick summary then, therefore, of what you would call cognitive style, or examples of, how about a couple of examples of unhelpful cognitive styles?
Okay. Well, first of all, just let's say what a cognitive style is.
Do it.
So it's the prism, I'd say, by which you view the world, right? It's the which can be distorted. So the way that you see the world could be similar to the way most people see the world, or it could be slightly towards the glass half empty, or it could be slightly seeing the world as slightly punishing, or that other people are not trustworthy, or that your place in the world is difficult because at the end of the day you don't value yourself very much.
Do you think this is hardwired, or do you just are these learned way to process the world based on previous experience, or both?
So
or it's not as simple as that.
no, it is learned. It is predominantly learned. You start off life with a certain temperament. You may be slightly, more anxious but as soon as you pop out the womb, I think you might be slightly more neurotic than someone else. But I think then how you create this idea of the world is largely going to be determined by your early experiences.
Early experiences, you say?
Yeah,
right.
Largely. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I'd say before the age of 8, it's the most important time.
Do you think you're set out on an anxious track by the age of 8 then? I mean, not 100%, of course, but do you think the experiences up to that point are amplified?
Anxious or depressive track, possibly. Yeah.
Wow.
But we're talking about a factor here, a psychological factor, which combines perhaps with a genetic vulnerability and other events and other things that impact. So just to underline, all these things interact. But yeah, if you were bullied at school, say,
No, I was pretty much the bully.
okay.
Oh, sorry, you're taking a
or even if
hypothetical
you were the bully,
stance. Yeah,
this can have impacts later on for your functioning.
yeah, it's
psychological
made me
health.
feel great about myself.
Did you demand their pocket money?
I am joking. I was a very, very shy child.
Well, you
I
didn't
was
throw,
neither
kids
bullied or
into
bullied.
nettles, or
I did not. I was neither bullied nor a bully, but I was quite quiet, and I was quite anxious. And I think that's probably persisted into adulthood.
you're making up for you're compensating a lot, aren't you, for your reticence as a child now? 'Cause
Yes,
you rarely shut up, both on stage and off it.
one rarely shuts up. These days, one rarely shuts up.
Yeah,
Okay, do you think we're getting almost towards the?
I think so. Yeah. Do you think there's anything we need to talk about in terms of what might lead to problems with how you view the world?
I think a couple of examples would be excellent. Yeah.
All right. So, we talked about bullying. Persistent bullying could affect your self-esteem, but I think a critical parent, it's awful to be, I think, the victim of maltreatment from your parents, physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect.
It's funny actually.
And-
When,
yeah.
as a parent, you remember some of the things that your parents said to you that were unkind or unthinking or damaging, and there wasn't many in my
No.
upbringing.
Not mine either. Yeah.
But the odd one which made you think, oh, and you as a parent, you feel sort of slightly paranoid that the things you could say in an unthinking moment might have an effect, all out of proportion of how they were meant.
Yeah, it's that Philip Larkin poem, This Be the Verse.
That's the
Man
one.
passes misery on to man.
Yeah.
It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out while you can and don't have any kids yourself. It's a great poem. I haven't quoted all of it because it's got a rude word in it. But it's the thing that all parents fear,
In
right?
fact, the second word in it is rude, isn't it?
Yeah. Passing the neuroses on through generations.
Oh,
Hey,
indeed, even overcompensating. You know, I find myself, my father was quite strict, wonderful father, but quite strict. And so I make an effort not to be strict with my children. And then
yeah.
I think maybe am I trying to be too much their mate rather than their parent anyway?
If you're bullied at school, you're trying to correct that by showing them.
I'll show the world.
I'll show the world. And I'll become a CEO of a major company. I wonder how many of them were bullied at school.
Oh, not many. They tend to be a bit alpha, innit?
What about comedians?
Definitely bullied at school. Yeah. It's simmering bed of neurosis.
We'll come back to it, but this idea of having a slightly glass half empty view of the world might predispose you to depression if you've had some bad experiences early on in life.
I know that one of the big therapies for curing depression is cognitive behavioural therapy, and I think this probably merits its own episode.
Yeah.
And I know that tries to sort of unpick, reprogram, if you like, some of the pathways in the brain that lead you to negative thinking, and that's been very successful.
I think we should also do an episode on resilience, because we've talked about the vulnerability factors, but the flip side of that is what protects you from those vulnerabilities and stresses kicking you into depression.
Almost like some sort of prophylactic.
Yeah, what are your coping skills? What is your social support like? What's your network like? What's the quality of that network? Does it provide a lot of emotional support, which is key? Practical support's important, but emotional support is thought to be the most important.
Lovely. Well, we talked about biological causes. We talked about life events, cognitive style, i.e. the biological, the social and the psychological. I found that very interesting. Thank you, Doctor. In
It's
terms
a pleasure.
of, I should say that at the end of every, we should do that our outro. Thank you, Doctor. I found that really useful discussion in terms of what causes depression. Hope you have too.
Hey, thanks for joining us on Why the Long Face. As ever, we're here to inform, hopefully, and entertain, but we're not here to give you medical advice. There is, however, information on our website, ytlf.com, that's whytlf.com, about where to get help. See you next time.